Hi, everyone. Welcome to the In-League podcast, powered by She Scores. I'm your co-host, Kat Pitré.
And I'm John, back as always.
So we are now on episode 10, which is crazy.
I know, right?
And a lot has been happening in the women's sports world. Obviously, we had the roundup of the Isobel Cup final that happened yesterday. When we're recording this, it's March 29th, so don't get confused.
Yeah.
There's also the NCAA. We're now on the Elite Eight, although, of course, by the time you're listening to this, they may be on what, Final Four?
They'll be the Elite Four, yeah.
Elite Four.
Final Four. Final Four. You said Elite Four. That kind of confused me, but yeah, Final Four.
It's so hard to keep track. Every single increment, they've got a whole different name.
Yeah, I think most tournaments have a different. Yeah, every tournament has different. So yeah,
So confusing. Purely for marketing purposes, I'm sure. And then there's a bunch of other stuff happening. So we're just going to talk about it. We're just going to give you the overview of what's been happening in March. So, but we're going to start with the NWHL because that just concluded. Yeah. You watched it. I watched it. It was a weekend of incredible hockey.
Yeah, it was good. I will say this, I am a newfound hockey fan. I definitely think I'm influenced much by you and spending a lot of time in Canada now. It is very big in the country. And because of that, I've spent a lot of time watching it now, and it's always on television.
Yeah.
There's always access to it. And so I haven't pledged allegiance to a team until we met Sammy Davis. Yes. And then I became a Boston Pride fan. And because of that, I was rooting for them the whole way through. And I will just say this, it is clear that they were never let the moment ever get too big for them. And I definitely think there was no doubt in my mind that they won it all, to be honest.
Yeah. So if you didn't watch it, the Boston Pride are the 2021 and Isobel Cup champions. Well deserved, I think. And you're right. They were super confident. Sometimes you can just tell, in the playoffs or whatever, when a winning team has swagger, that's the thing, right, in hockey. And they were confident. Even when kind of Minnesota got that first goal, they didn't seem to be... No, they weren't shaken up. And so they played like a winning team. But we're going to go back to the semifinals. Mm-hmm. The very first semifinals games, all of these were single elimination, by the way, which does change things. It changes what happens.
I actually have a grievance about that.
Oh, okay. Well, wait. Mm. Hold on to your grievance.
I will hold on to my grievance.
Hold on to your hot take, and then we'll get to it. Toronto 6 was the highest seed. It was seed 1. Boston was the lowest seed, and then Boston blew the Toronto 6 out of the water in a win that was, I would say, shocking just because of the seed difference. But Boston won the semifinal game 6-2.
Yeah.
It was rough.
In football, we call it a rout.
Yeah. It
was a rout.
Yeah. I mean, and the first period was really kind of quiet. You could sort of tell teams feeling each other out. Obviously, it's the postseason technically, but they didn't have any practice games against each other. They hadn't played each other since that, and all the way back in Lake Placid. And obviously, they took a minute off because of COVID.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden, Boston just picked it up like that.
Yeah.
And then they won 6-2. And we're like, okay, the Boston Pride are here. And not that any of us were really concerned about Boston not showing up. I mean, we're both Boston fans. Again, Sammy Davis, wonderful person, great interview. Check that episode out if you haven't already. But they've won the Isobel Cup before. They knew how to play in those sorts of situations. And this is the Toronto 6's first season, right? I mean, they're coached by the incredible Digit Murphy, who is very nice.
That's a hell of a name.
Hell of it. Her real name's Margaret.
But Digit Murphy is
what a good nickname. That is so good. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So cool. Incredible. Her resume is stacked. I'm like, Digit Murphy, you are a god. You are so cool. But the Toronto Six, I mean, it's their first season. They've never played in the Isobel Cup finals before. I think that was also part of it. And, you know, your first season together, sometimes a team has to feel each other out. Like, not everybody can be the Vegas Golden Knights, you know, and like, go all the way to the finals in your first season, like win.
That doesn't, I would say that's an anomaly. That doesn't happen.
Right.
Most expansion teams in most facets of sports, when there's an expansion team, they're actually usually terrible.
Yeah, and for a long time.
And for a
like
long time.
You are bad.
You are bad for a while. I agree.
Not the Toronto Six. I mean, they obviously came into it, you know, number 1 seed, but they were eliminated pretty quickly. And the semifinals I thought were interesting because Connecticut Whale, Minnesota Whitecaps, they were ranked 2 and 3. I don't remember which one was above the other.
I think the Whitecaps were 2.
Yeah, they might have been a little bit higher. I think Connecticut Whale have also never won an Isobel Cup, and so they were the underdog. Everyone was rooting for them, and then they also lost really hard. 7-0. So a great win for the Whitecaps, excuse me, and a shutout for Levier, the goaltender, and like, oh my god, incredible goaltending. I have to say, and I like Salander on Boston, but Levier, I mean, my best goaltender in the NWHL, I think. Amanda Levier, incredible.
I agree. I think too, just thinking about the Toronto Six and the whole idea of like expansion teams.
Yes.
I will say this. Boston is kind of like, they were in like that big sister mode throughout the playoffs. I mean, you can see it. Like, ultimately, when you know who you are, you know you've been here before. Like the Toronto Six, they overachieved. I mean, I don't think anybody with a right frame of mind just assumes the new expansion team is going to win it all.
Yeah.
And then let alone be number 1. Like the Vegas Golden Knights, that was an anomaly in itself. You know what I'm saying? And I just felt like Boston just kind of knew, like, they're this hot new team, but this is who we are. Like this, we've done this before. Like, and ultimately, there's no surprises at the end result. Toronto will be back. That sometimes it is good to lose in a manner like that, because next time you're not going to lose like that, and you'll play different. I think it's a lot of nerves.
Yeah.
You know, it's a lot of nerves. It's a lot of expectations, you know, and the moment gets big, like, you know, and we as athletes, we've all been in those situations, those high pressure moments. And you know, not everybody thrives in it. And sometimes you don't thrive in it the first time. So then the next time you're prepared for it. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to go through those moments.
Totally. The Boston Pride is a veteran team, and you can tell they know who they are. They know what their identity is on the ice. They know how to work together. Even with like a lot of rookies, I want to say that the Boston Pride had the most new players, or some of the youngest players. The way their coach, Paul Mara, moved the lines around, like Sammy Davis, she started on an all rookie line and then was moved up to play with some of the veteran players. He worked magic, and they knew what they were doing. The other thing about, like, you know, having an irregular season because of COVID, and being in Toronto, where there's some pretty strict guidelines, a lot of the Toronto Six players, you know, they couldn't have a full team on the ice all the time, or they had to practice, you know, in different groups, and I don't think it was an ideal setup. So kind of finding that team dynamic and finding that balance and really learning to read each other on plays, I don't think that they could really find that. And a part of that is like, again, being a new team, it's their first season, and it's a product of circumstance. They couldn't learn each other the way you normally would if you had a regular season with, you know, pre-games and whatever. And then, so finals, Boston Pride, Minnesota Whitecaps. It seemed like a very one-sided game for the first half, and then everything happened in the third period. Everything.
Suspense. Oh my God! If there was an award for like how dramatic a finish to a game could be in the history of women's hockey, that one definitely should be up for an Oscar, because that was phenomenal.
It was
Oh,
ridiculous.
phenomenal. Yeah.
And to the point that it was like period 3, we're like, yeah, okay. So the end of the second, it was 3-1 Boston. And I was like, oh, we know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
just saw the 6-2 loss, you know, with Boston and the Toronto 6. Boston was really, and I'll say this, they controlled the pace of play, I think, for the majority of the game, even with as speedy as Thunstrom was for the Minnesota Whitecaps. I mean, I feel like I blinked and it was a breakaway like every second. Um, you know, Boston was really controlling the game. They
Yeah.
had that swagger, they had that confidence.
I agree.
It was end of the second. I was texting a friend of mine. She was also watching the game, and we're both like, "Well, I think it's over for Minnesota.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I
Yeah.
guess." And then period 3, and then it's 2-3. They get
Yeah.
a Minnesota goal, Thunstrom again, and
He's
we were
good.
like, "Is that
He's
like
really
is it the
good.
comeback moment?" Oh my God, she's incredible.
Yeah, Allie Thunstrom is. Yeah, she made a fan out of me. She's really good. I like her. She's good. She's
Yeah,
good.
fast. I know people like
Yeah,
Conrad
I like the way she skates. Yeah, she's really good. I love the way she skates. Hopefully somebody passes this to her because I would love to get her on. She's great. I actually, I'm a fan. I'm 100% a fan.
Yeah. No, she's so good. And it was just, so it was kind of a quiet first and second. And this is, I don't like to complain about officiating. I never want to be that fan.
Yeah.
But you could even hear it on the broadcast with like Kate Scott and AJ Mizlika. I'm so
Mhm.
sorry. Her last name is so hard for me to say. Mizlika. AJ, please don't come for me if you listen to this. I apologize. Anyway, the NBCSN broadcasters were talking. They're like, "Oh, that's a penalty." And you could kind of see it on the ice. And again, you know, the referees, they didn't have eyes in the sky the way they normally do for the
Mhm.
NHL. And you miss stuff, right? The game
Yeah.
happens so fast, and if you're standing, you know, on one side of the rink and somebody like boards somebody on the other side, you know, you're not going to see it. So
Mhm.
fans watching see more penalties than refs do. That's just
Right.
how it works. But it was a really quiet, you know, first and second period.
Yeah.
And then every single penalty was called in the third period.
I
Constantly.
will say this though. You know what? I will say this.
Yeah.
And this is just as referees, you know, when you play sports, the stripes are either going to be really good, they're going to be lenient. You don't know what type of attitude you're going to get from
Hmm.
your officiating crew. Sometimes they can be really bad. Sometimes you get a really bad crew.
Yeah.
You got a crew that really calls a good game all the way through. But I think in a moment, you know, where you know Thunstrom gets another goal, the game when you call it, you kind of gotta be, you know, nothing really can fall through the rug. You know what I'm saying? Um, and I think it also does put a lot of pressure on the refs to try to call it the right way because it's so much pressure and the stakes are so high at the end.
Yeah. And to be fair, this is coming at a time, if you follow NHL news, that was the whole Tim Peel you know, hot mic incident, and that's a big conversation just in hockey in general about parity and officiating. And you can tell, I mean, it's a big conversation right now that, you know, we're not going to get into at this moment, but I'm a big fan of, again, like calling the game as you see it, always
Yeah.
call penalties, whatever. They got a lot of penalties, and so there was kind of these moments where you're like, oh my gosh, is this a comeback moment for Minnesota? They're, you know, they're going on the power play. Can they bring it to overtime? That was kind of the big thing. And then Minnesota would get a penalty, and then we're like, all right, oh my God, Minnesota, get it together. This is your one chance. um and then the other thing that happened, the Teresa Vanasova hit.
Mhm.
Teresa Vanasova, Boston, she gets a major, and so she gets taken out of the game.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a, what was it? I think it was like a 4-on-3 for a hot
1-3.
second,
Yeah.
because there was like the major penalty and then there were like some minor penalties. I'm not kidding you. If you didn't watch it, it was penalties every second on everyone. But Teresa Vanasova, really big hit, an ugly hit. I want to say it was on Audrey Shards. I'm
Yeah.
not positive on that, but what did you think when you saw that? Because she went down hard.
I'm gonna be honest, and maybe this comes from, like I said, a football. I tell you this all the time. I think things in football. I play
Yeah.
a high collision, high contact
Yeah.
sport. Um, sometimes you could say some things are dirty, but
Mhm.
like not fair. But I mean, I feel obviously for the player involved, you think, you hope they're okay.
Yeah.
You obviously think of the wellness of the player,
Mhm.
but these things really happen in sports, like ultimately, refs can penalize the players and things of these natures, but that is the nature of the beast sometimes. That is just the nature of sport. Like that's why you
Mhm.
put a helmet on and shoulder pads. And,
Yeah.
and I know that sounds terrible, but this is coming from like a guy, like I played football. Like I wouldn't have put the helmet and shoulder pads on if I didn't expect somebody to I've been injured before. I've been hit hard, like it happens. I think
Mhm.
the first thought is, you make sure the player is okay. And then, you kind of assess whether this is cause for a penalty or not.
Yeah. I mean, it was, and again, from my perspective, which was watching it on my laptop screen, it was a late hit. It
Yeah.
didn't seem dirty. It was shoulder first.
Yeah.
That happens. Maybe she could have, turned her skates at the last second. It happens. The player was okay. Again, I believe it was Audrey Shards. Don't hold me to that. But I mean, it was a checking from behind
Yeah.
major. Not great, but I thought it was as clean as you're going to get. It was clean-ish. I'll
Yeah.
say that. But that was kind of a big moment
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then obviously kind of shifted. And there was this momentum shift where they're like, okay, Boston's way down. I want to say, I think it was like 5-on-3
Mhm.
for a minute,
For
just
a hot
because of
second.
like the way the penalties
Yeah.
kind of aligned. And Minnesota couldn't do it. And they were playing really slow. It was they knew, I think, even when it was 4-3, they had this opportunity to get into overtime. Lavisa Salander, who's the
Yeah.
goaltender for Boston, she had it locked down. And they were slow, they were tired, and
Yeah. They had to capitalize on the moment.
they just didn't,
They just didn't.
which was surprising.
Yeah, I was pretty surprised too. I was thinking
Yeah.
Dunstrom was gonna go for the hat trick. At that point, I thought
Yeah.
she might sneak and get a hat trick in this moment. Just because,
Yeah.
in the biggest moments, your best players, they shine in these moments. This could be one and I feel like it should have been that moment. And the way the momentum was swinging is like, you know, at first it definitely looked like, okay, this is about to become a Boston route.
Mhm.
Which made it kind of uneventful. That's not what you want to see in a championship game.
Right.
But ultimately, there came a point where you start questioning, like, okay, maybe Minnesota can win this. Like, if things go the right ways, we might see a. I think even though Minnesota was seeded higher than Boston, I still think, well, for me, it would have been an upset in my eyes.
Mhm.
Even though maybe like on paper it wouldn't have been.
Yeah. I mean, and so this was also a rematch. I mean, this was an
Yeah.
emotional game, and I think that's also where maybe the Vanasova hate came from. Like
Mhm.
these teams do have an intense
History.
rivalry,
Yeah,
and they
it's a
have a history,
history.
and they met in the Minnesota was the defending Isabel Cup champions. They met in the finals last year. And Boston, they took it home. 4-3 win over Minnesota. I was
Mhm.
hoping they would get to overtime, not because I wanted Minnesota to win, but
Yeah.
because I wasn't ready for it to be over.
Yeah.
You know, um, it was just an incredible moment watching them and watching like the cup get handed over. I mean, it was really
Yeah, it was
emotional.
nice. Yeah,
It was incredible. I was like, I wish we
yeah.
had this every weekend. And that was the thing that kept coming up. And I said this on Twitter, like, it was an incredible weekend of hockey.
Mhm.
And I wish we had that every weekend.
Yeah,
I wish we had that every day because it was so wonderful in the post-game media conferences. I mean, even for Minnesota, which was a little bit tough. I mean, it's always hard hearing from the players when they've just lost and the
yeah,
coaches. I mean, that's really tough, but it was still, I mean, they were positive and they're like, we came back and we played. And that
yeah.
was the big thing because at the end of the day, this is amazing, amazing hockey,
Mhm.
but they are still fighting for, a sustainable women's professional hockey
Hockey
league. They
league.
are
Yeah,
fighting for visibility. They're
yeah.
fighting for inclusion and to be a part of that.
Mhm.
on the media side is a privilege and something that I definitely, we're part of history and kind of navigating this
Yeah.
space as well. And they appreciate that. And that was really affirming.
Yeah.
And that was really cool.
Yeah.
But also, for the players, and that was the thing. I'm like, you guys are inspiring a generation of hockey players right now. This was the first time women's professional hockey has ever been, women's professional hockey championship, has ever been broadcasted nationally. That is phenomenal.
Yeah.
A little late. It's 2021. We
Yeah,
should
for
have been
sure.
here, I don't know, like
For
15, 20
sure.
years ago. But,
100%.
beggars can't be choosers. We still have to recognize how historic that is. And this is the first time that kids are seeing that. That's
Yeah.
huge. And so, I don't want to take away from that message as well, because that is so important.
Mm-hmm.
And as amazing as it is, it's a little bittersweet because
Yeah,
I'm not ready for
honestly,
women's hockey to be over yet.
yeah, no, I definitely, it definitely is always bittersweet coming to the end of a season. But I will say this, I did say earlier that I had a grievance, and it's not really so much a grievance. It's just a 1-2 that I think the playoffs should be in more of a series.
Yeah. I think
Obviously,
it was just logistics and money.
yeah, I was about to say, obviously, I would be very, small-minded not to assume logistics, finances, COVID, those things being involved. But, as somebody who watches, especially in big games, I do like the series method because, somebody out, like in basketball, somebody who doesn't play much may come off the bench, or somebody just goes off and hits 10 threes, an anomaly game, and it's over. So sometimes
Yeah.
I do like the series, but obviously I understand reasons why that may not happen. But I do say this: I think next year, after the start of this year, I'm excited to see the developments for next year.
Yeah.
I really do hope within this time now, after the season ends, the NWHL and the PWHPA really kind of put their heads together during this time, because I do really feel like, from watching the Isobel Cup, there is so much more potential. And, when you get the backing of an NBC behind you, you can do more. So it's just exciting to see what the future holds. And I just think, they got riding this momentum is great. And I get what you're saying too about, like, it just should have happened sooner. But at least it's happening now, and we got to just keep pushing it to make it better now that it's happening, because ultimately that's all we can do, because now it's here. So
Yeah. As we're moving on to the NCAA conversation, I'll end with this for the NWHL. You're right. The future is really, really bright. PWHPA, hopefully there's negotiations or talks, or they have somewhat of a relationship, but maybe that will develop. And really the big thing, NHL, get involved. ESPN, as they have this new TV deal with the NHL. ESPN, your time is now. You have to get involved. And there might be a Montreal expansion team.
Yeah, that'll be
for next season. Hasn't been confirmed, but it's been rumored that it's been out there. So now there might be Canadian rivalry on the horizon, and that'll be really exciting.
That would be great.
But NCAA Elite Eight, who's in it?
So the March Madness Elite Eight is here. I'm really excited. I love March Madness. I love March Madness because there's heroes, there's Cinderellas, there's a bunch of new players that come out that you never heard of. And then there's teams that probably don't get the public recognition that they deserve, but they finally get a chance to be on national television, and that's what makes it great. So, UConn plays today. They actually played already, because by the time we're recording this, they actually just got by Baylor 69-67. I'm kind of upset I missed it. I'm going to definitely check the highlights. Go Huskies, because I'm taking them to win the whole thing. Indiana, Arizona. Shout out to Indiana. This is their first Elite Eight in school history. So I'm definitely rooting for them. But we are in for a chock full of really good games. Texas, shout out to Texas. Drake, Champagne Poppy. He bet money on the Texas upset You know, they went viral because, you know, there for those who don't know, who don't gamble, but you know, I sometimes partake in sports gambling. I kind of make that publicly known. Texas was a plus 610 underdog. So pretty much for those who don't gamble, they would have, for them cashing, Drake made a lot of money on the return. So I'm more of an Oklahoma guy, but hook 'em.
Drake had it right.
He got it right.
He had the insider.
He did have the insider. And then there is Louisville and Stanford play. I actually think I think Dana Evans, she plays for Louisville. She's a stud. Oh my God. Like, she can do it all with the ball in her hand. She's a great scorer. But I actually think Stanford is going to take that. But I think UConn wins it all. But I do have to say this about the Elite Eight, and I will say, shout out to the women's hoopers, because I will say the influence of women's basketball and the overall fight and equality in women's sports, like not only the WNBA, I think the WNBA, and I do it myself, I credit them a lot for the way they tackle.
They set the standard in a lot of.
Yes, they set a great standard. But I will say this, shout out to them students in the NCAA who's speaking up for themselves. Because that takes a lot of courage. And not only does it take courage, it takes belief in you wanting better for the next group of women that are going to be playing NCAA basketball. You know what I'm saying? So I've enjoyed the Elite Eight up to this point. I think it is going to be great. Go Huskies, for sure. Go Huskies. But I do have to make that clear. I think the one gripe that I have with the NCAA tournament, and this is with the NCAA, is next year, if the NCAA, if somebody listens, we need to make sure there's a petition or something that makes sure for the rest of March Madness basketball, there's no longer a women's basketball logo in the middle of the court.
Yeah.
There just needs to be a March Madness, or you need to, if you're going to be to separate the March Madness of it, put men's basketball on the men's court. If you're going to do that, but it just needs to say March Madness, because that in itself is the root of the divisive nonsense that we talk about in sports. And it's that idea that we separate, like women and men are separate in the landscape of sports, and it's not that way no more. Like, it really isn't. Like, so ultimately, that is my biggest gripe. I don't think that needs to be changed for at least next year. Or hopefully for the championship, they get rid of it.
Yeah. And we talked a lot about last episode, all about the NCAA madness that happened with, the women's weight rooms. And we talked a lot about, like the division in the NCAA and that kind of unequal representation and how like much that sucks. But I'm glad that you're bringing it up again, because these players are, I mean, first of all, incredible. I mean, what a joy it has been. I've caught a few games. I haven't been following it as closely as like I normally would. There's just so much hockey going on. I'm a big hockey fan. It's about I was like, I gotta focus on this. And I did take UConn to win, but I mean, somebody like Sedona Prince has been great. Obviously,
she's been great.
She's been really great.
She's a rock star. Yo, she's
also
rock star.
Super vocal. Yeah, I love the clip going around of her dunking. And we talked last episode about like Shaq's comment, and we went into all of that. But that clip where she's just like dunking, and I'm like, yes, Sedona Prince.
She needs, honestly, she has so much personality. Like, when she's done with like when she's off season in basketball, like she needs to be like on a podcast or somebody's talk show, because just chop it up with her. She has a great personality. Yeah,
she has been great to watch. Caitlin Clark, obviously, and this is my one gripe. I know, I love that you brought up the court thing. I hate it. These are strong words, but I hate it when sports media will try to pit two like really young, talented players against each other and try to kind of like fabricate a rivalry. I mean, we saw this is like this is an old reference, but stay with me here. If you all remember the 2008 Olympics, they're like Shawn Johnson and Nastia Luke, and that was like a big thing. Like they tried to make this rivalry. We've seen it. I think we see it in like every sport, you know, men's and women's. And I hate it because I'm like, we don't need this.
Yeah.
Let them both be great. And they have a great relationship. And that's one of the things that's been awesome to see. Obviously, they met in the Sweet 16. Iowa did not move on. UConn did. But the respect and the friendship that Caitlin Clark and, you know, Paige Beckers, is that how you say her last name? I always get mixed up. You know, they're the two big stars, I think, of the NCAA, you know, tournament so far, and how much respect they have for each other on and off the court. I mean, it is a wonderful thing to see, even as people are trying to pit them against each other.
Yeah, I think it's hard, you know, the thing about sports is it's not just the players on the field, it's like the narrative and the glamour of it, you know. And then because there's media and there's people in newspapers, like people like us, you know, like we talk about sports. The media, in terms like the journal, like the people who write the columns and stuff, they're gonna set narratives. You know, I feel like ultimately you really can't run from them. Um, Caitlin Clark and Paige Beckers, they've played each other. They know they're friends. They know that.
Yeah, they've
At the
known
end
each
of the
other
day,
for a long time, I think,
yeah,
too.
at the end of the day in sports, you're gonna be competitive with one another. That's just how it is. I definitely think they probably gonna be bringing the best out of each other for years to come. Um, but I do understand where you are coming from 100%. But I feel like we can't really escape it because there's always going to be somebody trying to create a narrative. I think it's always just up to the athletes and also some of the fans to just not read too much into like, everything has like context. Like just like don't read too much into like what the headline is. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I think one thing I talked about on my on Ball Talkers podcast a little while ago is I think both of them should be allowed to go to the WNBA.
Do you think they're ready though?
Let's see, this is my thing, Kat.
Okay.
In men's basketball, at one point you can go to the NBA out of high school. Then you can go to the NBA after 1 year of college. So when you're 19. If Paige Beckers, Caitlin Clark, Leah Edwards, who's also in that game,
she's been great.
They are Canada's very own. Shout out to Canada. You know, she scores the Canada production. Anyway, but back to my point. They are that good. They can go to the WNBA. They can play right now. And the thing is, you know, it's not fair. I don't even think it's fair for us to question if they're ready or not. Because in the men's game, we don't question if they're ready. You know, if it is already assumed that they can one and done and go. Like I'm gonna go to college for 1 year and play. And obviously, some may say, well, in the WNBA, you don't make as much money as the NBA, so why would you want to go out early? Like, wouldn't you want to get a degree? All these other factors. But ultimately, for Paige Beckers and a Caitlin Clark to really capitalize the most off this image that they've already built, it is not staying in the NCAA for 4 years. It is for them to go and decide, like, I'm going to play professional basketball and market off who I am. You know what I'm saying? And they should have the luxury and the privilege to do so. You know, they should be able to decide their fate. I do not think it is appropriate that you got to be 22 to play in the WNBA. When you don't need to, when you're not, yeah. I think it's 22, or I think if you're coming out of college, I think it's different if you're going overseas. But I know if you're coming out of college, like there's legitimate rules. I think it's like 3 years. You got to do minimum 3 years. But like your freshman, sophomore year, you cannot go out for the draft. And I just think Caitlin Clark and Paige, they can play in the WNBA. I mean, if there's been hundreds of 18, 19-year-olds who played in the NBA. It's not that much of a difference. Like some sports, like football, you got to get a certain level of like just physical mass and strength to be able to play that sport at a professional level. Basketball, you'll get that as well, but that physical take, like that to get big it's not the same. Like there's just levels to it. It's different, you know. So that's just my little piece about that. I do feel like there needs to be a strong consideration about a rule change in women's basketball about when is it all right to go professionally.
This is so interesting. And this is kind of why I love having conversations with you, because, I'm a hockey fan.
Yeah.
Are, basketball and football, is because and this is like a sport culture thing,
Yeah.
I think. And that's why I said, I was like, oh, are they ready? Because normally in hockey, it's rare.
Mm-hmm.
And I say this with Cole Caulfield just being drafted
Mm-hmm.
or signed by the Habs out of Boston University.
Mm-hmm.
You do not normally play right away.
They sound
You
like
get
you're
drafted
right.
18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
You typically, unless you're granted Connor McDavid or Sidney Crosby or Andre
Yeah.
Svechnikov or whoever, you spend time in
Developmental.
and like the lower
Yeah.
leagues to build that up. It's actually, and for some players, it can be years before they come up. You
Yeah.
really
You
have
got
to
to get called
develop
up
them.
to play with the pros.
Or you come up for a couple of games.
Yeah.
They really, I mean, now the culture of hockey is really focused on developing young players. You don't want to go throw them in too early, especially if they're a losing team. And so that's why it's kind of like, oh, that's really interesting that narrative is kind of flipped in the sense for basketball.
Yeah, no, I definitely, I think, well, just basketball, I think it's the physicality of the sport is just different, like even in hockey, like it's just like in hockey, you got to know how to skate. Like you got to be a good skater.
Yeah.
It's different. There's just different like development pieces of hockey compared to like basketball. You know what I'm saying? And if in the WNBA we did like a G League or like some sort of like they drafted the rights to a player or something like that, maybe that would be different. But yeah, I just think there needs to be an assessment of that rule. This needs to be an overall assessment of that as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you hearing about this. And if it's different for the NBA and they can get younger players, then it should be equitable for the WNBA.
Yeah, no doubt.
It should be the same.
So before we go, there's just two things I do want to talk about. One before we close, but there's one more thing. There's that CarMax commercial with Sue Bird and it features Steph Curry and it features Sue Bird. And for those who haven't seen it, I definitely suggest watching it. Pretty much the car salesman, Steph Curry pulls up to buy a car at CarMax, and there was an exchange, and then the car salesman goes, I'm having a good day. It's not too many times you get to wake up in the morning and sell a car to a 4-time champion. And Steph Curry goes 3-time champion. And then the salesman goes, no, I just sold a car to Sue Bird. 11-time All-Stars, 11 All-Star appearances, Sue Bird, legend. And then I have to be honest, the thing I love most about this is and especially from like my perspective, as like I identify as he is a man in the male perspective, sports is so rooted in the male perspective, and it's unfortunate because obviously that's like the culture of how things are developed, how we've, socially, like at one point, you got to remember at one point in like, it wasn't really always even cool for women to play sports, like there is definitely statistics where most girls drop out of sports after middle school.
Yeah, the rate at which women drop out of, or girls, I should say, drop out of sports is twice that of boys, and there's cultural implications for it. You're absolutely right.
And women need to become the standard as well in sports. Like this shows women as the standard, because overall sport has been such a male-dominated culture. And this commercial, it's only 30-second commercial. But for a 30-second commercial, like the message is there, and it's like right on time. Like I think right now I feel like personally that we are coming into like this cultural shift in the sports world. Like in the overall, I think the sports world is about to expand in a way that people do not realize what they're about to see. Like between esports, the rise in the way we look at women's sports, finally, like it is about to be off the charts. But shout out to CarMax and the NBA and the WNBA for, well, I don't know whose idea was it, but I know it was presented probably by both of those leagues because of the players who were in it. Ultimately, I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was right on time. I think the message, as simple as the commercial was, the message was very loud, very loud.
I enjoyed it. It made me laugh. I like saw it on Instagram and I was like, oh, what? And made me laugh. It was my favorite thing about it, besides the fact that like I thought it was really funny, is how normal it was. And I don't
Yeah,
know, do you know what I mean?
yeah,
Like there's so many commercials and they are valuable and they are necessary and I still love them. But there's so many commercials and I think of Nike in particular that has I don't know. I mean, it's gosh, I don't know how to like word this, but it treats it as something special. And
yeah,
it is because sports world is unequal.
right.
But if we're trying to make something the standard, we should treat it as such instead of treating women's sports as a novelty, as something that's extra or different.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved about this commercial is that it was just, yeah, that's Sue Bird.
Yeah,
Four times whatever, like it was funny and it was just very normal.
yeah,
And that's what I think we need. That's the narrative we
yeah,
need, is if we just treat it as, yep, men's and women's sports are of equal value, which they are, and just treat it as such, because the
yeah,
more that we kind of engage with this regularly, the more our social culture and the associations we have with sports culture being masculine or feminine are going to start to dissipate.
yeah.
And that's what we really need.
Yeah, no, I agree. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was great. So before we come to a close, I just want to say, we put out a statement in our last episode about the events that took place in Atlanta, and about just discrimination in the Asian community, just discrimination as a whole, racism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but the events that had happened in Boulder, Colorado, um, there was another shooting. A number of people have died. And I don't want to get too deep because we already gave a statement about it, but this just happened right after that. So it's just like, um, I don't want to say like a slap in the face to us because this is crushing to all these families, but it's just disheartening, like it's disappointing, you know. Um, I
Yeah,
just
and
want to
it's
say,
important to acknowledge it.
yeah, we have to just acknowledge the truth. And I just want to say, my heart, my prayers, condolences go out to all the families who are affected by this. Um, and we just got to start, we got to really start assessing our gun laws in this country, in
Mm-hmm.
America. We got to start really looking into like why this is happening,
Yeah.
and like starting to make up measures to avoid this, because this is becoming so, well, this has been a constant for a while now. This is not something new, but
Mm-hmm.
golly, like how many times, like it's just ridiculous, and it's sad. And
Yeah.
families should not be able to leave where one of their relatives go out to do something simple and not come back home.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody should have to think like that. We shouldn't have to think like that as a society. But unfortunately, that is our reality, and it has to change.
Right.
So my prayers
I
go out to the
also.
families, and my heart's with all of you. Prayers as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we didn't feel right ending the episode without acknowledging the events that have taken place. And as the episode before, resources regarding gun laws in the United States, She Scores is a Canadian production. However, John and I are both American.
Yeah,
Um, and so we will be listing resources for, US gun laws and also educational resources and whatever, just to do our own little part in hopefully changing um, this unfortunate culture that we have in the United States as it regards gun violence.
yeah.
So, on
And
that note,
oh, go ahead. Oh, my bad. I didn't mean to cut you off, Kat. But I
oh
just
my
wanted to.
goodness.
No, no, no. I just wanted to say, like, you know, we've been going through COVID-19 being like this big pandemic, but the biggest pandemics we've seen in the last 2 years has been racism and gun violence. That has been the two biggest forms of a pandemic in the United States of America. And I just feel like I just had to make sure people understood that.
Right. Yeah. Neither of which are new, but they're still unsolved, and so we want to bring light to those situations.
Yeah.
But as we close out this episode, again, resources will be listed in the description box, so please check those out. If you want to get in touch with us, you can shoot us an email at inleaguepod@gmail.com, and you can follow us on Instagram at shescores.ca, and contact information for John and I, if you ever want to reach out, will be listed in the description box of the episode as well.
Till next time.